We're just days away from reaching 1,000 subscribers. If we can hit this goal in the next 15 days, we'll be able to keep the channel running and continue bringing you these stories. Your subscription makes all the difference. It's quick and helps us tremendously. The Heir of the Snow. Chapter 1. The Desperate Prayer. Montclair Castle, December 1847. The icy winds of the Norman winter whipped against the ancient towers of the castle, and snow fell in thick gusts over the sleeping gardens. In the castle's private chapel, lit by the trembling glow of a few candles, Duke Edward de Montclair knelt before the altar, his clasped hands pressed together in desperate prayer. At 34, Edward was a man of natural distinction, tall and slender, with black hair streaked with a few silver threads and grey eyes that reflected both the nobility of his lineage and the weight of his responsibilities. For 10 years since becoming duke, since his father's death, one obsession had consumed his existence, ensuring the continuity of his 8-century-old bloodline. "My God," he murmured in the silence of the chapel, "grant me the grace of an heir. The Montclairs have served France with honor for generations. Do not let this noble lineage die with me." His voice broke slightly on these last words. Edward had been married for 6 years to Countess Mathilde de Beauvais, a union arranged according to aristocratic conventions. Matilda had been beautiful, well-educated, perfectly suited to what was expected of a duchess, but their marriage, though respectful and cordial, had never known passion, and above all it had remained barren of children. Mathilde had died the previous year of a fever that had taken so many nobles that winter. Her death had been a sincere grief for Edward, but what tormented him now was far deeper than mourning. It was the anguish of seeing ended with him a lineage that had survived centuries, wars, and revolutions. "Father," he continued, fixing his gaze on the silver crucifix, "you who have blessed the unions of my ancestors, who have granted them sons to carry the Montclair name, do not abandon me. Show me the path to fulfilling my duty." The wind intensified, making the chapel shutters groan. Edward shivered, but he did not rise. He had been there for more than an hour, praying with the fervor of a man who feels his prayer is his last chance. He thought of his ancestors, whose portraits adorned the great gallery of the castle. William de Montclair, who had fought alongside William the Conqueror. Henry de Montclair, companion to St. Louis during the Crusades. Charles de Montclair, who had survived the wars of religion. Francis de Montclair, who had narrowly escaped the revolutionary scaffold. All had had sons to perpetuate the name and honor of the family. And he, Edward, last of his line, would he be the one to let everything collapse? At 34, it was not yet too late to remarry. Several noble families had already discreetly indicated they would have daughters to marry in the spring. Young women of good birth, fertile, who could give him the heirs he so desperately desired. But something in him resisted the idea of another marriage of convenience. His union with Matilda had taught him that fulfilling matrimonial duty without love was a cold existence indeed. Could he not hope to find a woman who would unite both nobility of birth and warmth of heart? "Lord," he resumed, his voice resonating in the sacred silence, "if you must grant me a wife, let her be one who will know how to love my future children as much as I myself will love them. Let her bring to these walls the joy they have never known." A sudden noise made him start. Someone was knocking at the castle's main door. In this snowstorm, at this late hour, who could possibly come to disturb the peace of Montclair? Edward hesitated a moment. He would have liked to continue his prayer, but the knocking persisted, echoing through the castle corridors like an urgent call. Perhaps it was a traveller in distress, seeking refuge from the storm. He rose slowly, adjusted his dark velvet frock coat, and walked toward the chapel door. In the corridor, He encountered Thomas, his old butler, who was hurrying toward the entrance with a candle in his hand. "Your Grace," said Thomas, slightly out of breath, "someone is knocking at the door. In this weather, it must be urgent." "I'll come with you, Thomas. Let's see what this is about." They crossed the castle's great hall together, their steps echoing on the stone flagstones. Outside, the knocking continued, regular but respectful, as if the person knocking knew the etiquette required when addressing a noble dwelling. Thomas drew back the heavy oak bolts and opened the great door. A swirl of snow immediately rushed into the hall, bringing with it the biting cold of the winter night. On the threshold stood a young woman, wrapped in a brown wool cloak covered with snow. She held in her arms a small, carefully wrapped bundle, and despite the cold that must have numbed her, she stood straight with a natural dignity that immediately struck Edward. "Forgive this intrusion, Your Grace," she said in a clear voice, despite trembling from the cold. "I am Claire Moreau, former servant of the castle. I come to bring you something that belongs to you." Edward frowned. Claire Moreau. That name sounded familiar. Wasn't she that young domestic who had left the castle a few months after Matilda's death? A discreet and hard-working girl, if his memory was correct. "Please come in, Miss Moreau," he said, stepping aside to let her pass. "Thomas, close that door and light a fire in the small salon. Miss seems frozen with cold." Claire entered the castle with a respectful curtsy, but Edward noticed that she pressed her mysterious bundle against her, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you for your kindness, Your Grace," she said. "What I have to tell you cannot wait until tomorrow. It concerns your inheritance." These words chilled Edward more surely than the winter wind. His inheritance. What could this former servant know about his family affairs? "Explain yourself," he said, in a voice where unconscious authority showed through. Claire looked him straight in the eyes, and in her gaze Edward read a determination that did not correspond to the humble status of the young woman. "Your Grace," she said, tightening her arms around her bundle, "you have a son." The silence that followed these words was total. Even the wind seemed to have quieted. Edward felt the world sway around him. "How? What are you saying?" "You have a son," Claire repeated with more firmness. "He is 10 months old, he is in perfect health, and he resembles you so strikingly that no doubt is possible." With a trembling hand, she drew aside a fold of the blanket that wrapped her bundle, revealing the sleeping face of a baby with black hair and delicate features. Edward approached, as if hypnotized. The child slept peacefully, a small fist closed against his cheek. And indeed, despite his very young age, the resemblance was troubling. The same eyebrow design, the same nose shape, the same dimple in the chin that he himself possessed. "My God," he murmured, "how is this possible?" "If Your Grace would grant me a few minutes," said Claire, "I will explain everything." But Edward was no longer listening. His gaze was fixed on the child, on this small being who could be the answer to his most fervent prayers. An heir. After so many years of sterility and anguish, an heir might be there, before him, brought by a storm night like a Christmas miracle. Chapter 2. The Revelation. The castle's small salon was now warmed by a crackling fire in the fireplace. Claire Moreau sat in a velvet armchair, still holding the sleeping child in her arms, while Edward paced back and forth before the hearth, his mind in turmoil. "Tell me everything," he finally articulated, "from the beginning. How this child, how my son." He could not finish his sentence, still in shock from this revelation that overturned everything. Claire took a deep breath before beginning her story. "Does Your Grace remember Marie Dubois?" The name struck Edward like a slap. Marie Dubois. How could he forget? That young woman of 20, daughter of a tenant farmer on the estate who had come to work as a chambermaid at the castle 2 years earlier, beautiful as the day, with chestnut hair that caught the light and hazel eyes full of life and intelligence. Yes, I remember her, he said slowly. She left the castle quite suddenly, it seems to me. Indeed, Your Grace. She left because she was pregnant. The memories now flooded back into Edward's mind with painful clarity. The previous winter, shortly after Matilda's death, he had gone through a period of deep despondency. The castle seemed like a tomb to him, and he himself felt more dead than alive. It was in this state that he had found comfort with Marie, not just physical comfort, but moral as well. Marie had a natural way of smiling, of speaking of simple and beautiful things that had brought back a little light into his dark existence. Their liaison had lasted 3 months, 3 months of discreet happiness, stolen between proprieties and ducal obligations. Marie would come to find him in his private apartments, and together they found a peace that neither had known before. Then, one morning, Marie had disappeared, without a word, without an explanation. Edward had first thought she had been afraid of the social consequences of their liaison. He had made discreet inquiries, but no one knew where she had gone. "Where is she now?" he asked in a strangled voice. "Why didn't she come herself?" Claire's face darkened. "Marie is dead, Your Grace. She died in childbirth 10 months ago." Edward collapsed into an armchair as if struck by lightning. Marie dead, this young woman so full of life who had restored his taste for existence. She had chosen to leave so as not to compromise you, Claire continued gently. Marie knew that a duke cannot marry a simple peasant girl. She didn't want her pregnancy to become a scandal that would tarnish your reputation. "My God," Edward murmured. "If I had known, I would have found a solution, I would have." "She knew that, Your Grace. That's why she confided her secret to me before dying. She made me promise to raise the child and, when he was old enough to survive the journey, to bring him to you. Why wait 3 years? Because she made me promise not to say anything as long as you were in mourning. She didn't want this revelation to poison your grief. But now what? Now Henri is growing up and asking questions about his papa, and you mourn a daughter while ignoring that your son lives. Marie wouldn't want that." Edward looked up at the child, his son, the son of Marie and himself, the heir he had prayed so fervently for heaven to send him. "What have you called him?" "Henri, Your Grace, like your father. Marie thought it was appropriate. Henri de Montclair." The name resonated with perfect rightness. Edward stood and approached Claire. May I hold him?" Claire nodded and delicately handed him the child. Edward received him in his arms with an emotion he had never felt. Henri opened large grey eyes, his father's eyes, and cooed softly. "My son," Edward murmured, and these words seemed to him the most beautiful he had ever spoken. "My little Henri." The child, far from crying in the arms of this stranger, seemed on the contrary soothed. He caught Edward's finger with his little hand and gripped it with surprising strength. "He recognizes you," said Claire with a smile. "Marie always said he had inherited your character as much as your features." Edward was unable to take his eyes off the child. All his prayers had just been answered, but in a way he would never have imagined. Not through a marriage of convenience with an aristocrat, but through the love he had shared with a simple and true woman. "Claire," he said finally, "what can I do to thank you? You raised my son, you protected him, you brought him to me. How can I discharge such a debt?" "I only respected Marie's will, Your Grace. She wanted Henri to know his father and receive the inheritance that is rightfully his." "Rightfully," Edward repeated. The legal question was complex. Henri was an illegitimate child, and according to law, he could not inherit the ducal title. But Edward was determined to find a way. He was duke, he had connections, power. He would obtain from the court that Henri be legitimized. "You will stay here, naturally," he said to Claire. "Henri needs you, and I, too, will need your advice to raise him. If your grace wishes, I insist. You will be part of the family, Claire. You will be. His governess, his protector, his second mother." Claire inclined her head with gratitude. Then she looked at Edward with a grave expression. "There is something else you must know, your grace." "What is it?" "Marie. Marie loved you. Truly. She never wanted to leave, but she thought it was best for you. Her last words were to ask your forgiveness for not being brave enough to tell you the truth." These words pierced Edward's heart. Marie had loved him, and he had loved her too, even if it had taken him time to admit it. Now she was dead, but she had left him the most beautiful of gifts, a son. He held Henri closer and looked out the window. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but it no longer seemed hostile. It looked rather like a blessing from heaven, which had accompanied the arrival of his heir, Henri de Montclair, his son, the child he had called for with his most fervent prayers. His lineage would not die with him. Chapter 3. The First Days. The days following Henri's arrival completely transformed the atmosphere of Montclair Castle. For the first time in years, the corridors echoed with laughter and baby babbling, and Edward discovered the unexpected joys of fatherhood. Claire had settled into a suite of rooms near the ducal apartments, and she watched over Henri with a devotion that deeply touched Edward. It was obvious that she had a sincere maternal affection for the child, born from those 10 months when she had raised him alone. "You love him like your own son," Edward remarked one morning, finding her rocking Henri near the nursery window that he had hastily arranged. "Marie had entrusted him to me," Claire replied simply. "For me, he became, yes, like my child, even though I know he has now found his real father." The simplicity of this answer moved Edward. Claire had given up her own life to raise Henri, and now she had to accept sharing him with him. This natural generosity made her even more precious in his eyes. Edward spent more and more time with his son. Every morning, after dispatching urgent correspondence with his steward, he would go up to the nursery and stay for hours, observing Henri, talking to him, holding him in his arms. The child was visibly growing day by day. At 10 months, he was beginning to sit up by himself. He babbled constantly, and his grey eyes shone with intelligence. When Edward entered the room, Henri immediately reached out to him with cries of joy. "He adopted you very quickly," Claire observed with a smile. "Marie was right to say he had your character. Look how he watches you when you talk to him. He tries to understand every word." Indeed, Henri fixed his father with sustained attention, as if trying to decipher the mystery of this man who spoke to him with such tenderness. "Papa is going to teach you to ride horses," Edward would tell him while carrying him to the window to show him the stables, "and to handle a sword, and to manage the Montclair lands. You'll be an accomplished duke, my little Henri." These plans for the future filled Edward with a joy he had never known. Having an heir was much more than perpetuating his lineage. It was having someone to love unconditionally, someone for whom to build the future. However, the question of Henri's legitimization remained to be resolved. Edward had written to his connections at court, but the procedures were long and complex. Meanwhile, he had discreetly brought the village priest to baptize the child according to all the rites of the church. "Henri François Edouard de Montclair," the priest had solemnly declared while pouring holy water on the baby's forehead. Claire had attended the ceremony as unofficial godmother, and Edward had been moved to tears to see his son officially receive the Montclair name. But what touched him most was the evolution of his relationship with Claire herself. At first, she had shown respectful distance, always keeping in mind the social difference that separated them. But gradually, in the intimacy of the nursery, caring for Henri together, they had developed a natural complicity. Claire knew all of Henri's tastes and habits. She knew he needed a particular lullaby to fall asleep, that he loved playing with a little wooden horse she had carved herself, that he couldn't stand being alone too long. "How did you learn to take such good care of children?" Edward asked her one day. "I was the eldest of 6 children, Your Grace. My mother being often ill, it was I who raised my brothers and sisters." This revelation shed new light on Claire's personality. Edward now understood where her natural maturity came from, her instinctive way of caring for Henri. "Where are they now, your brothers and sisters?" Claire's face darkened slightly. "Gone, Your Grace. Our parents died of fever when I was 16. My brothers and sisters were taken in by different families. That's why I went into service." Edward suddenly realized that Claire had sacrificed her youth to raise her own family, then had devoted her life to Henri. This 24-year-old woman had more maternal experience than many aristocratic mothers. "Claire," he said one evening, as they watched over Henri together, who had a little fever, "I want you to know that you will never be considered a mere servant in this house. You are. You are my son's mother in the noblest sense of the term." Claire looked up at him with eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you, Your Grace. Those words, they mean a lot to me. Call me Edward when we're alone with Henri. We form a family, in a way." The word family resonated strangely between them. It was true that they formed a sort of family, the father, the child, and the one who had served as mother. But it was a very particular family, born of tragic circumstances and the love of a departed woman. The evening when Henri took his first steps, it was toward Claire and Edward that he headed, tottering, arms outstretched to keep his balance. When he reached Edward's knees, Edward lifted him in his arms with a cry of triumph. "My son walks! Claire, did you see? He's walking." "It's wonderful," said Claire, tears in her eyes. "Marie would have been so proud." This evocation of Marie cast a veil of melancholy over their joy. Edward often thought of the one who had given him this marvelous son. He bitterly regretted not having known the truth while she was alive, not having been able to protect and help her. But watching Henri grow under Claire's attentive care, he told himself that perhaps Marie had done things well. She had entrusted their child to the person who would best know how to love him and prepare him for the day when he would find his father again. Winter was coming to an end, and with the approaching spring, Edward felt that his life was taking a definitive turn. He had an heir, he had rediscovered the joy of living, and he had beside him a remarkable woman who shared his love for Henri. But he was asking himself an increasingly pressing question. What place would Claire occupy in their lives in the long term? And above all, what exactly were the feelings he was beginning to harbour for this woman who had turned his existence upside down? Chapter 4. Nascent Feelings. Spring had brought to Montclair Castle a renewal that no one had foreseen. The gardens were blooming again, birds were singing in the century-old lime trees, and Henri, now 14 months old, was exploring the world with the overflowing enthusiasm of a little boy in full discovery. Edward had arranged for him a small enclosed garden near the nursery, where Henri could play safely under Claire's supervision. It was there that he liked to find them each afternoon, after having settled the estate's affairs. That day, he saw Claire sitting on a stone bench, Henri on her lap, showing him the different flowers she had planted. She wore a simple blue cotton dress that enhanced her chestnut hair and hazel eyes. In this golden spring light, she was of a natural beauty that struck Edward as never before. "Papa! Papa!" cried Henri upon seeing his father, reaching out his little chubby arms toward him. The word "papa" which Henri had learned to pronounce a few weeks ago, always made Edward's heart skip. He rushed toward them and took his son in his arms. "My little prince," he said, spinning him around, provoking crystalline laughter. "Were you good with Claire today?" "He was perfect," Claire replied, smiling. "We planted roses and he wanted to water all of them. Look at his little hands." Henri indeed extended his still damp hands toward his father, proud of his apprentice gardener work. "We make an excellent team," said Edward, sitting next to Claire on the bench. "Don't we, Henri?" The child babbled joyfully, moving from his father's arms to Claire's with that absolute confidence of loved children. Observing this scene, Edward realized how much they indeed resembled a real family. "Claire," he said impulsively, "I received news from the court. Henri's legitimization procedure is progressing. In a few months, he will be officially recognized as my legitimate heir." Claire's face lit up. "Oh, Edward, that's wonderful. Marie would have been so happy." She had said Edward naturally, as he had asked her in private. This first name in her mouth had a particular sweetness that did not escape him. "But this raises a question," he continued. "When Henri is officially heir Duke of Montclair, he will need to receive appropriate education. A tutor, arms masters, language teachers." "Of course," said Claire, and a shadow passed over her face. "He will need to learn his rank and responsibilities. But I don't want him to lose what is most precious to him, your love and tenderness. Claire, would you accept to stay with him, not as a governess, but as his adoptive mother?" Claire's heart stopped beating. "Edward, you know very well that's impossible. When Henri grows up, when you remarry—" "Who says I'm going to remarry? Come now, you're a duke. You need a wife of your rank, a duchess who will know how to keep your house and receive society." Edward put Henri down so he could play with his little wooden soldiers, then turned to Claire. "What if I told you I've already found the woman who knows how to keep my house and take care of what is most dear to me?" Claire looked at him without understanding. "Who are you talking about?" "About you, Claire. About you." A stunned silence greeted this declaration. Claire stared at Edward as if she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. "Edward, you don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I know perfectly well. These months spent together have opened my eyes. You are everything I could wish for in a wife. Kindness, intelligence, love for Henri, and—" He stopped, suddenly aware that he was making a formal declaration. "And what?" asked Claire in a weak voice. "And a beauty of heart that surpasses all the factitious beauties I have ever known." Claire shook her head vehemently. "Edward, this is madness. I'm just a former servant. What will your peers say? What will society say? I couldn't care less what society says. I've learned that happiness is worth more than all the world's conventions." He moved closer to her, took her hands in his. "Claire, these last months have been the happiest of my life. Not just because Henri gave me the joy of being a father, but also because you brought to this castle a warmth, a tenderness that I no longer hope to know. But Edward, let me finish. When I see you with Henri, when I hear you sing his lullabies, when I see your smile light up his face, I realize that this is true love, not marriages of convenience, not political alliances, but this natural harmony we three have found." Claire had tears in her eyes. "You cannot marry me, Edward. Think of your rank, your responsibility toward your lineage." "My lineage? But Henri is my lineage. And you are the one who saved it, the one who preserved it. If anyone deserves to bear the Montclair name, it's you." Henri, sensing tension in the air, abandoned his toys and came to nestle against Claire's knees, looking up at her with worried grey eyes. "Mama," he said in his little voice, for that's how he had learned to call Claire. This word split Edward's heart. Henri considered Claire as his mother, and he himself. He himself was falling in love with this exceptional woman. "You see," he said softly, "Henri has already chosen. He considers us his parents. Why wouldn't we make this dream a reality?" Claire took Henri in her arms and held him against her, as if to give herself courage. "Edward," she said finally, even if I felt for you what you seem to feel for me, how could you be sure it's not just gratitude, recognition for what I've done for Henri?" Edward smiled tenderly. "Because what I feel has nothing to do with gratitude. It's love, Claire, a love I had never known, even with Marie." This comparison overwhelmed Claire. Marie, Henri's mother, the one Edward had loved. "I cannot take Marie's place," she murmured. "You're not taking anyone's place. You're creating your own place, unique and irreplaceable." At that moment, Henri extended one little hand toward his father and another toward Claire, as if he wanted to bring them together. "Papa, Mama," he said with his most beautiful smile. And in this innocent child's gesture, Edward and Claire read it as a sign of destiny. Chapter 5. The Decision. The following days were marked by a bittersweet tension between Edward and Claire. Since the Duke's declaration, their relationship had imperceptibly changed. Claire showed herself more reserved, as if afraid of letting feelings she was trying to silence show through. Edward, for his part, multiplied delicate attentions without ever forcing her decision. He offered her books from the castle library, knowing she liked to read in the evening after putting Henri to bed. He had more elegant dresses made for her under the pretext that she should be dressed according to her rank as principal governess. He asked her opinion on all arrangements concerning Henri, treating her as an equal rather than a subordinate. "You're trying to seduce me," she told him one evening, as he had just brought her a cashmere shawl for cool evenings. "Is it working?" he replied with a smile. "Edward, be serious." "But I am very serious, Claire. More serious than I've ever been in my life." They were in the nursery. Henri was sleeping peacefully in his carved little bed, and the soft candlelight created an atmosphere of intimacy that troubled Claire. "Look at him sleep," said Edward, approaching the cradle. "He looks like a little angel. Thanks to you, he's growing up in love and security. That's normal. I love him like my own child, and that's exactly why you should become his mother legally. Claire, Henri needs you, and so do I." Claire also approached the bed and contemplated the sleeping child. Henri was now 15 months old. He spoke better and better. He was lively and intelligent. Sometimes she saw in his expressions traits of Marie that she had described to her, but more and more it was Edward's personality that showed through, that determined way of frowning when he wanted something, that royal manner of tilting his head when spoken to. "Edward," she said softly, "you must understand my position. I'm 24 years old. I have no dowry, no family, no title. You're a duke. You could marry a princess if you wanted. How could I believe you truly love me?" Edward gathered his courage. "Because I'm going to prove it to you." He took from his pocket a small velvet box which he opened before her. Inside sparkled a ring adorned with an emerald surrounded by diamonds. "This ring belonged to my mother," he said. "She wore it for 40 years of happy marriage with my father. I want you to wear it, Claire. I want you to become my duchess." Claire stepped back, overwhelmed. "Edward, no. You cannot." "Yes, I can. And I want to. Claire Moreau, will you accept to become my wife?" Claire's heart was beating so hard she was sure it could be heard throughout the castle. This wonderful man, this loving father, this duke who had all the privileges in the world, was asking her to marry him, her, the penniless orphan. "What if I can't be a proper duchess?" she murmured. "You already are. You manage this house better than Matilda ever did. You know how to talk to the servants. You know the farmer's needs. You've transformed this austere castle into a warm home. But society gets used to everything when things are presented with enough authority. And besides, I have powerful allies. The Count de Beauvais, who was Mathilde's uncle, has already let me know he would support my choice, whatever it may be. Claire was amazed. You spoke to him about me? I spoke to him about my feelings, and do you know what he told me? Edward, marry this woman who makes you happy and give her the title she deserves. Great loves are too rare to sacrifice them to conventions. These words finally broke Claire's defenses, because deep down she knew she loved Edward. She had loved him from the first days, when she had seen him take Henri in his arms with that wondering tenderness. She loved him for his kindness, for his intelligence, for the way he listened to her and respected her opinions. Claire, Edward insisted, at least tell me I'm not wrong about your feelings. Tell me that what I read in your eyes when you look at me isn't just friendship. Claire looked at him for a long time. In his grey eyes she read so much sincere love, so much hope. You're not wrong, she admitted in a breath. I love you, Edward. I've loved you for so long I've lost count of the days. A radiant smile illuminated Edward's face. Then, marry me. Be my Duchess, be Henri's mother. Be my beloved wife. Claire extended a trembling hand. Yes, she murmured. Yes, I want to become your wife. Edward slipped the ring on her finger, then drew her into his arms and kissed her with all the contained passion of these last months. Claire nestled against him, overwhelmed by emotion and happiness. We're going to be happy, he promised against her lips. All three of us. We're going to form a real family. At that moment, Henri stirred in his bed and opened his eyes. Seeing his two parents embracing, he gave them the most angelic of smiles and reached out his little arms toward them. Papa, Mama, he said clearly. Edward and Claire exchanged a moved look. Henri had pronounced these words like a blessing on their nascent union. You see, said Edward, taking his son in his arms, Henri approves of our marriage. Mama, pretty, added Henri, touching Claire's dress, provoking their tender laughter. That night Claire fell asleep with the emerald ring on her finger and Edward's love in her heart. She who had known only the orphanage and domestic service was going to become Duchess of Montclair, but above all, she was going to marry the man she loved and officially adopt the child she already cherished as her son. The Christmas miracle that had begun with Henry's arrival in the storm was being completed by this promise of family happiness. Chapter 6. The Preparations. The announcement of the engagement between the Duc de Montclair and Claire Moreau had the effect of a small earthquake in Norman society. Some were indignant about this misalliance. Others saw it as proof that times were changing and that love could sometimes triumph over social conventions. Edward had chosen to present things with total frankness. He officially announced that he was marrying the woman who had raised his son Henri with exemplary devotion, and that this union was motivated by sincere love and gratitude. Miss Moreau saved my heir, he declared to the prefect, who came to present official congratulations. She gave him the education and affection that a child of his rank deserved. Who better than she could become the Duchess of Montclair? This argument carried weight. Gradually, local society got used to the idea that the former servant was going to become Duchess, especially since Claire, under Edward's direction, quickly learned the customs of her future rank. Hold yourself straighter, he told her tenderly during their etiquette lessons. You were born to wear the ducal crown, Claire. You just need to become aware of it. Claire applied herself with touching determination to master the art of worldly conversation, the rules of precedence, the management of a great noble house. Edward had brought from Paris an experienced chaperone, Madame de Verneuil, to help her in this transformation. Miss Moreau has remarkable natural intelligence, Madame de Verneuil reported to Edward. She learns quickly, and she has that innate grace that no lesson can give. She will make a perfect duchess. Meanwhile, Henri grew up in this atmosphere of happiness and preparations. At 16 months, he ran everywhere in the castle, explored every nook and cranny, and charmed everyone he met with his liveliness and good humor. "Papa, marriage! Mama, dress!" he said, clapping his hands when he saw the Parisian seamstresses arriving to make Claire's wedding dress. The ceremony was planned for June in the castle's private chapel. Then a grand reception would bring together all the nobles of the region as well as the farmers and servants of the domain. "I want this to be a celebration for everyone," Edward had declared. "Claire was one of them before becoming mine. It's right that they should share our joy." This decision had further increased the Duke's popularity among his people. They admired his generosity, and above all, they were happy to see that one of their own was going to become Duchess. A month before the wedding, Edward received news that filled him with joy. Henri's legitimization had just been officially granted by His Majesty. Henri François, Edward de Montclair, was now recognized as legitimate heir to the dukedom. "My son," said Edward, taking Henri in his arms, "you are now officially the future Duke of Montclair, and in a few weeks Claire will legally become your mother." Claire cried with happiness upon learning this news. All legal obstacles were lifted. Henri would have his inheritance, and she would have the right to adopt him formally. "Marie can rest in peace," she murmured. "Her son will have everything she wished for him." Claire's transformation was spectacular. Under the care of expert ladies' maids that Edward had brought, she had learned to dress her hair and apply makeup according to fashion. Her new dresses, tailored from the finest fabrics, revealed a natural elegance that her former condition had hidden. "You are dazzling," Edward told her one evening, seeing her descend the grand staircase in a midnight blue silk dress. "I still feel like I'm playing a role," she admitted. "Sometimes I look at myself in the mirror and I don't recognize myself." "You're wrong. This Duchess you see in the mirror was already you. You've only revealed what was hidden." Their engagement had also transformed their relationship. Edward showed himself more tender, more demonstrative. He no longer deprived himself of taking Claire in his arms in front of Henri, who would then clap his hands, crying, "Papa loves Mama." One evening, as they were walking in the castle gardens while Henri slept, Claire confided her last apprehensions to Edward. "What if I can't give other children to the Montclair lineage? Henri might be our only son." Edward stopped and took her by the waist. "Claire, Henri is quite enough for me. He's the miracle I had stopped hoping for, and if there are to be other children, they will come when God pleases. The important thing is that we three are happy. You really don't regret not marrying a princess?" "How could I regret marrying the woman who saved my son and conquered my heart?" He kissed her under the stars, and Claire felt her last doubts fly away. This man truly loved her, deeply, sincerely, and she loved him with all her being. The evening before the wedding, Claire paid a last visit to Marie's grave in the village's small cemetery. She had erected a beautiful white marble headstone, where was engraved, "Marie Dubois, loving mother, 1825-1846. "Marie," she murmured, placing a bouquet of white roses, "tomorrow I'm going to marry Edward and officially adopt Henri. I promise to love him as you would have loved him, to give him all the happiness you would have wanted him to have. Rest in peace, my dear friend." The wind rustled the leaves of the trees, and Claire had the impression of hearing like a blessing in this murmur of nature. Tomorrow she would become Duchess of Montclair. Tomorrow she would marry the man of her life and adopt the child of her heart. The Christmas miracle was about to be completely fulfilled. Chapter 7. The Miracle Accomplished. June 15th, 1848, Montclair Castle shone as never before. The roses were in full bloom in the gardens, flower garlands adorned all the balconies, and generous sunshine bathed Normandy in golden light. It was the wedding day of Duke Edward de Montclair with Claire Moreau. From dawn, animation reigned throughout the castle. The cooks busied themselves with final preparations for the feast, the gardeners arranged the last floral decorations, and in the guests' wing, Norman nobility prepared to attend the event of the year. In her apartments, Claire was finishing dressing with the help of Madame de Verneuil and her ladies' maids. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk, embroidered with fine pearls, with a train of Chantilly lace that had belonged to Edward's mother. On her chestnut hair arranged in a sophisticated chignon, she wore the tiara of the Duchesses of Montclair, a diadem of diamonds and pearls that gave her natural majesty. "Madame the future Duchess is absolutely radiant," declared Madame de Verneuil with tears in her eyes. "Never has this tiara been worn with more grace." Claire looked at herself in her bedroom's full-length mirror and could hardly believe that the elegant woman facing her was indeed the former servant who had knocked at the castle door on a snowy night. In a few months, her life had tipped toward a happiness she would never have dared imagine. A discreet knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Henri entered, magnificent in his little navy blue velvet suit, holding his father's hand. "Mamma, pretty!" exclaimed the child, running toward Claire, who bent down to take him in her arms, being careful not to wrinkle her dress. "My little prince," she murmured, kissing him, "you're very handsome today." Edward, splendid in his ceremonial outfit in Montclair colours, contemplated his fiancée with undisguised admiration. "Claire," he said in a moved voice, "you exceed all my expectations of beauty. It's thanks to you that this transformation was possible. No, it's thanks to you that the miracle is accomplished." Henri, who didn't understand everything but sensed his parents' emotion, extended one little hand toward Edward and another toward Claire. "Papa, Mamma, Henri family," he declared with the seriousness of his 18 months. This innocent phrase made Claire smile through her tears of emotion. "Yes, my darling, we are a family." The ceremony hour was approaching. In the castle chapel, guests had taken their places. Nobles, bourgeois, farmers and servants of the domain side by side in a social harmony that honoured Edward's convictions. In the front row, the Count de Beauvais, uncle of the late Mathilde, set the tone by ostensibly approving this union. His presence had been enough to rally the last recalcitrants of Norman aristocracy. When the great organ began the wedding march, Edward, who was waiting at the foot of the altar with Henri in his arms, felt his heart race. Claire appeared in the doorway, accompanied by Thomas the butler, who had requested the honour of leading her to the altar. The assembly rose in a murmur of admiration. Claire walked up the central aisle with sovereign grace, her gaze fixed on Edward and Henri, who waited for her. In her eyes shone love and the pure joy of a woman seeing all her dreams come true. "My dear brothers," began the Bishop of Bayeux, who had come specially to celebrate the ceremony, "we are here gathered to unite in the sacred bonds of marriage Monseigneur Edward de Montclair and Mademoiselle Claire Moreau." The ceremony proceeded with perfect solemnity. When the moment for consent arrived, Edward and Claire looked into each other's eyes with an intensity that moved the entire assembly. "Edward François Henri de Montclair," said the bishop, "do you consent to take Claire Marie Moreau as your wife?" "Yes," Edward replied in a strong voice that resonated throughout the chapel. "I want her as my wife, before God and before men." "Claire Marie Moreau," the prelate continued, "do you consent to take Edward François Henri de Montclair as your husband?" "Yes," said Claire, her voice clear and firm despite emotion. I want him as my husband." When the bishop pronounced the sacramental words that made them husband and wife, Henri, who had followed the entire ceremony with the seriousness of a little man, clapped his hands and cried, "Papa, Mama married," triggering tender laughter from the assembly. The kiss that sealed their union was greeted by enthusiastic applause from all present. Edward lifted Claire in his arms and spun her around under the rose petals thrown by the guests. The reception that followed in the castle gardens was memorable. Nobles and commoners fraternized in an atmosphere of general joy. Claire, now Duchess of Montclair, moved among her guests with natural ease that forced everyone's admiration. "Your Grace," the Count de Beauvais told her, "allow me to tell you that you honor the Montclair name. Edward made the choice of his heart, and it was the right one." "Thank you, Count. Those words touch me deeply. You saved this lineage, Madame. This little Henri you raised with so much love is a treasure for all of us." Henri, precisely, was the king of the celebration. In his beautiful outfit, he ran everywhere, accepted caresses and compliments, and proudly presented Papa and Mama to everyone he met. Evening came after the departure of the last guests. Edward, Claire, and Henri found themselves in the small family salon. Claire had exchanged her wedding dress for a simpler dress, and they were savoring together these first moments of their official family life. "Papa," said Henri, climbing onto Edward's knees. "Henri, happy?" "We're all happy, my son," Edward replied, tenderly ruffling the child's hair. Claire watched them with infinite tenderness. This wonderful man was now her husband. This adorable child was now legally her son. She thought of Marie, who had made all this possible through her sacrifice and love. "What are you thinking about, my dear wife?" asked Edward, noticing her dreamy expression. "I'm thinking about Marie. I tell myself she must be happy, wherever she is, to see Henri so flourishing and so loved. I'm certain of it, and I think she would approve of our happiness." Henri, tired by this long day of emotions, was falling asleep against his father's shoulder. Claire stood to take him in her arms and carry him to his nursery. "Our son," Edward murmured, accompanying them. "Our son," Claire repeated with happiness. When they had put Henry to bed, Edward and Claire remained a moment near his bed, contemplating this child who had transformed their lives. "Do you remember that December night when you knocked at my door?" asked Edward. "How could I forget? I was so afraid you would refuse to recognize Henri. I was praying for an heir when you arrived. You were the answer to my prayers, and you were the answer to mine, even if I didn't dare hope for so much happiness." They left the nursery together and headed toward their conjugal apartments. Claire was still dazzled by the speed with which her life had changed. "Duchess of Montclair," she murmured. "A year ago, who would have told me I would bear this title?" "I would have," said Edward, taking her in his arms. "If I had known you a year ago, I would have known immediately that you were the one I needed." That night, in their silk-curtained chamber, Edward and Claire sealed their union in tenderness and passion. They were husband and wife, duke and duchess, but above all, they were two souls who had found their other half. 5 years later, Montclair Castle resounded with the laughter of 3 children. Henri, now 6 years old, had become a lively and intelligent little boy who was already learning Latin and riding. He had 2 little sisters, Marie-Claire, born in 1849 and named in homage to the 2 women who had marked Edward's life, and Matilda, born in 1851. Claire had become an accomplished duchess, respected and loved by all. She managed the domain with competence, received society with grace, and above all, she had given Edward the family happiness he no longer hoped for. One winter evening, as they watched their children play near the fireplace, Edward took Claire's hand and brought it to his lips. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for what?" "Thank you for knocking at my door that snowy night. Thank you for bringing Henri into my life. Thank you for becoming my wife. Thank you for all this happiness." Claire smiled and rested her head on her husband's shoulder. "It's I who thank you for opening your heart. You transformed a servant into a duchess, an orphan into a fulfilled mother." Henri, who had heard the conversation, abandoned his toys and came to nestle between his parents. "Papa, Mama, Henri loves you lots," he declared. "We love you lots too, my prince," they replied in chorus. Outside, it was beginning to snow again, like that memorable night when everything had begun. But now, the snow was no longer synonymous with distress. It was the symbol of the miracle that had united this family and continued to bless their happiness. The Duke had prayed for an heir. God had given him much more, a son, a beloved wife, and descendants who would perpetuate the Montclair name in love and joy.